Okay, today we are off to an really ambitious and quite challenging episode, which is going to be about retro PC gaming. Actually, it's going to be about retro PC gaming for an absolutely obscene amount of money. I'm going to show you my retro PC in parts and then we're going to assemble it. And on the desk we have various components that were also a part of that system at one point or another. Reason being, some of them worked with it, some of them didn't. Some of them I got as a gift from my retro PC aficionados friends. But, more about that a little bit later. So welcome to that IT Show podcast episode about retro PC gaming, and let's roll the intro. So, yeah, that's the beast that we are going to be discussing today. And I'm going to be disassembling it on camera and then reassembling it back together. I'm going to be giving you a little bit of a, let's say, background information about why I assembled this PC. And trust me, I'm not alone. This has grown in popularity in the past 3 to 5 years enormously, especially since the COVID days. And also some of the, let's say, technological reasons why these are so important, even 20, 30 years after the fact that they were introduced. Closer to 30 actually than 20. So just as a general description, first and foremost, this computer has, I'm going to pretend that I don't know, and I'm going to take a shot of one thing, but obviously you can see the dual slot 1 thing happening here. I'm going to take a shot from here, and hopefully it's going to end up looking very good. Yeah, no such luck, of course, because a lot of light is inside here. But these are basically your two Pentiums 500, 100 megahertz FSB. And in terms of memory, we have, I think, 256 times 4. Yes. So it's a gigabyte of memory, basically. I think it's the maximum amount for this motherboard as well. The motherboard is the famous Asus's P2B DS, one of the most famous motherboards of the era. There were a couple of others that were really important for that time period as well. But this was actually one of the first times that a desktop platform was made with a motherboard that could sustain or that could use more than one CPU. Nowadays we have workstations for that, and we can buy workstations with 2 CPUs, no problem. In terms of some of the general things that you can find on the motherboard, additionally, or in the system, I have an ATI All-in-Wonder graphic card, AGP version. And actually on one of the shots from the introduction, you probably saw that I have a couple of them, a couple of other models. This here is an Adaptec 2940 UW. So it's a SCSI controller. I had to get this one. I used to have, 3 or 4 of them, but I got rid of those years ago to my discredit. I had to use this one because the SCSI connector here on the motherboard that is supposed to sustain these LVD disks doesn't work, which was a common problem with some of these motherboards. So I'm not using the 50-pin one. I'm only using, this is the 68-pin, if I remember correctly. And in here I have Sound Blaster, the famous AWE32, the ISA version. I specifically wanted this one. And I wanted it because it has these sorts of upgradable things that I added to it, and it can work very well with sound fonts if you're into music like I am, and I have a library of sound fonts that I used over the years and whatnot. Furthermore, we have a couple of other really exotic components here. We have a couple of SCSI disks. These are actually LVD, and I have a LVD terminator. Those things were very expensive back in the day, and don't even get me started on the cables. cables were insanely expensive, especially the external ones, a topic for another day. These are two 73.6 gigabyte, I think, discs, and I have another one that I still haven't put inside, SCSI free, 73 gigabyte IBM disk that I could also use, but currently I'm not using it. And actually, just 1 second, in the future, I will upgrade this case a little bit, modify it, so that the discs are inside a dedicated SCSI disk caddy, because it has a cooler in the background, in the back end, so it can cool the discs, because these are all, I think, 10K, if I remember correctly, so they tend to get quite hot. Let's call it that way, because that's actually the way it is. And on top here in the system, I have a set of probably 2 out of 5 of my favorite components of all time in the PC industry. And we're talking about 2 Plextors. Plextor 40 Max, the famous and best CD-ROM of all time by a large margin. And also pairing with it is a Plex Writer, so Plextor's CD Burner 820, for those of you who are into those types of data. They have also been connected, but they are connected to the board. They are also bootable, and I can deploy operating system from them. I actually think I used them already to deploy Windows 98 SC. We can see that at the end of the process. We can open them and we can check what's in. And at the bottom I have a power supply, of course, as you might imagine. This is a very expensive and very, very large Be Quiet case. I bought it specifically for this build because I wanted to put this computer in a large case so that all the components have enough place for cooling, as they tend to get quite hot, especially the discs and the CDs. But these cards here are also, you know, there are no slouches. They tend to get quite warm if you use them as they are meant to be used. Out of all of these components, I mentioned a couple of my favorite components of all time. On that list, the ATI All-in-Wonder card definitely belongs to probably the very top or very close to it. I had, over the span of 6 or 7 years, when I started assembling my computers, over that time period I had 3 or 4 of them. They were immensely expensive. Basically, I remember when I bought the first one, it was 2,000 kunas in Croatian money, which is roughly 300 euros in today's money. But if you count the inflation and everything, it would be close to something like more than 1,000 euros in today's money. Insanely expensive. But I was lucky enough that I had, various types, side hustles and, student jobs when I was in college, so I could afford these things. These computers were not something that I was given. I had to earn money to buy them, and I spent such an enormous amount of money on all of them, and I wanted to have exclusively SCSI stuff, and I still have a SCSI scanner from that era that still works, the Hewlett-Packard's ScanJet, for those of you who are familiar with those things. And I just cannot, get myself to a state where I let it go and throw it in the garbage can. A, it was very useful for me when I was using it. B, it's SCSI. C, it's from that era. And D, it works. So why should I throw stuff away that works really well? So that's a little bit of a background story. Going back to the optical drives, yeah, those were basically unobtainium in the era where my first version of this computer was assembled, as well as the Asus motherboard. CPUs were available, although at that particular time period we are talking about mostly Celerons, 66 megahertz ones that were the vast majority of not only of our local market, but generally speaking of the market. No difference whatsoever. Celerons were, cut down versions of the Pentiums with a little bit less power, but they were still quite useful. I had, in that same computer, I had Celeron 300s overclocked to 450 with a little bit of soldering job done in slot 1 version as well, and various other components, even some Pentium 3s, I don't know, 800 or something like that. I still have some of those old Pentiums in my drawer. At a certain point in the future, I'm probably going to put them somewhere on the wall in the background of our studio, just for fun. You have to have a little bit of memorabilia. Experiences are what's worth in life. It's not about the money; it's about the things that you go through. When I bought this board, I also had to, do a factory reset, and I installed a new battery on the board. I remember that vividly. And also on the board, there are two regular parallel at our IDE channels, and a floppy controller is on the board as well. And the board prominently features various types of these old technologies like jumpers, etc., that you could use to modify the way in which the motherboard was configured so that it could take a variety of different components, CPUs included. This is basically a reincarnation of a computer that I used to almost put myself to hospital at one period in time. In 1995-1996 period, I started playing some of the games. I actually think I have the CDs, DVDs for installation of those still here somewhere. Yes, I do. I actually got them with me. So I'm going to show you a couple of games. I got them recently from eBay as well. A lot of people will find this to be very, very familiar, especially if they are my age. So maybe like this. So Command & Conquer and Dune 2000. I started with CNC and then went to Dune 2000. I told the story in one of the previous episodes in brief form. But when I discovered Dune 2000, that re-jump started my, let's say, gaming addiction. And I remember vividly, I was first year college over the summer break, after basically missing the whole year of classes on my college. I was spending all of my time playing this game because it's so much fun. It is the most fun game for me that I ever had. Only closely followed by CNC and, for example, Dune 2, Dune 1, those types of strategic games. I adore those things. But I vividly remember one situation related to Dune 2000 when I basically almost put myself in the hospital after playing it for more than 5 days straight without sleeping. Monday to Saturday. The only thing I did during that time was play, eat, drink, go to bathroom, and play again, and then, go round and round and round and round. I basically wore myself to a state in which I needed infusion to basically get some electrolytes and some energy. And afterwards, I realized that I had a problem with gaming, and that was the pivotal moment actually for me in life, in which I decided that I'm never going to let any kind of addiction like that spoil some of the things that I'm working for in other parts of my life. So that's the story of that, and I never have afterwards actually. I usually don't play this game anymore for obvious reasons, but I did once. In 2004, I was delivering a class for one of our electric companies that produces electrical energy. We were away from our capital, so they called me to their location. They have a training center, something like 150 kilometers away from Zagreb, and I spent that week playing that game. So I was doing 8 to 4 class. 4:15 I was in the room. 4:15 the gaming session started, and it lasted until 7:15 in the morning next day. Then breakfast, then class 5 days in a row. On Saturday I got home. I was dead tired, slept for 2 days, and afterwards I never did anything similar to that again. But still very fond memories because these are excellent games. I'm a huge fan of the movie, original one as well. And yeah, this is the reincarnation of a computer that I used to play that game, for enormous amount of hours. And actually, I used to work for a guy who was doing a lot of copying of the games at that time that was considered to be fun. And we played, I think it was Command & Conquer, via parallel cable or something like that overnight when we didn't have anything to do. So we spent countless nights playing these games up until somebody, fell asleep, and then repeat afterwards the next day onwards. Okay, the story goes on. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the components here, and then I'm going to disassemble everything and reassemble it back together. For the first part of the story is definitely the motherboard. I mean, it's so unique, so special. It has such a special place, not in my life specifically. I'm not talking as a fanboy here. I'm talking from technical perspective specifically, nothing else. So this is one of the most significant pieces of hardware ever invented in the history of PC motherboards and PC components overall, if you want to really look at it properly. It has what's called a BX chipset, 440BX, one of the best chipsets that Intel ever made. It was really a chipset that was baked in stability, worked very well, no problems with it. I had multiple BX boards over the time span of 5 years. All of them worked perfectly from day one to day N when I got rid of them, so no problem with that. Slot 1, so it's dual slot 1. Slot 1 is the name of the slot in which the CPUs were inserted. There were actually two ways in which you can do that. You could either buy a slot 1 CPU, or I think it was socket 370, if I remember correctly. There was a converter board on which you could put the 370 CPU, and then you could put it in slot 1. Basically, we had two sockets for almost all of the CPUs in that specific time period, which happened for a couple of years after that, and then stopped happening because you know how that story goes nowadays. So two Pentium 3s, very, very cool CPUs. We did a whole series of Intel-related episodes in the past 6 months, so you can take a look at our take on Pentium 3s and 4s if you want to there. So we talk about these CPUs for hours and hours on end, Yasmin and myself. And the maximum amount of memory. It has a built-in SCSI controller. SCSI nobody talks about today, although it's the basis for almost all of the protocols that we do use, for USB, for FireWire, for iSCSI, for Fiber Channel, for everything that we use. The basis of that lies in SCSI protocol. It has both the regular SCSI 1.2 and SCSI free connector with low voltage differential, so LVD. Some of the specifics of SCSI may be a little bit more suited to some kind of an other episode, but SCSI was also very famous for requiring certain things, which were expensive cables, controllers, and terminators. One example of such terminator is actually right here. You can see it. You can see it on one of the cameras. This cable, I have it since those days. So this is, I don't know, 30 years old probably already so far. The terminator I bought recently, although I had one and I still have it from those days. This cable, so SCSI 1.2, cable 50 pin, I have it from those days as well. I have an infamous amount of external cases and external cables and internal cables for SCSI at home in one of my drawers, actually two drawers, that again I cannot seem to get rid of. Again, reason very simple. I paid an enormous amount of money for them, and from time to time they can be very useful. I had an experience a couple of years ago. A friend of mine who is a musician, so fellow musician, called me that his synthesizer broke down and that he wanted to extract the data from his synthesizer, Kurzweil synthesizer, and he had the data on an external SCSI drive, because Kurzweils did have SCSI controllers, additional cards. And he asked me if I could get the data, the part of it which was in internal drive in the synthesizer, and the part that was on the external drive, and record that, burn that for him on a optical media, on a DVD. So luckily I had all of those cables and the controller and everything. It took me less than 30 minutes to do that, and he paid handsomely for that, although I didn't ask him to pay at all. But it was one of those things where when your past habits and past, let's say, memorabilia can be incredibly useful, even to the point of making just some incredible amount of money. I got something like 300 euros for half an hour of work for that, which was, mind-boggling at the time. Other than that, the Plexter still sells for roughly 100 euros a piece, which it is just a CD, so it's super expensive for that purpose. The writer, so the Plex writer also, the people are, asking an incredible amount of money for that. And the discs are becoming rarer and rarer. I tend to have quite a few of them, luckily, so it's not like I'm going to end up without them, but eventually they're going to fail. I'm going to have to replace them maybe with the IDE drives, or I'm just going to add a SATA controller on the ISA slot, and everything is going to be just fine with that as well. This case is a heavy overkill for this system. It has a stack of coolers in the front and on the top, but I just wanted to make it nice and cozy and comfortable for all of the components to fit, so that I can actually use them, repair them, and to have access to everything without everything being in a jumbled mess. The computers of that era were usually a jumbled mess. Cases were smaller, they weren't as deep, so you were forced to, claw your way around the cables and the controllers, which, trust me when I say this out loud, it was no fun to do that at all. Okay, so that's that. Now we move to the disassembly and the assembly part of the video. Let's now disassemble the motherboard and the corresponding things from the motherboard, as this is probably the most, let's say, complex thing to do. There are a lot of cables here and whatnot. I'm not going to disassemble the discs and the CD-ROMs. That's pretty straightforward, but I'm going to take out all of the cards and all of the cables and lay them down so that we can take some pictures and so that we can see what's happening here. First and foremost, my Sound Blaster card. At times these old cards can get stuck a little bit because, they're very old. This one is 30 years old. Every single one of these cards is very, very, very old. I mean, the BX chipset came out in 1998, if I remember correctly, so you know that it was quite a while ago. In terms of ATI all-in-wonder cards, prior to AMD buying ATI, I just cannot think of like nice enough words about these cards. They got me through recording of so many of the TV shows that were in weird schedules when I was in college or when I was outside or doing sports or learning or whatever. I could always rely on them to do a scheduled recording and whatnot. I remember all of those cards very fondly. I'm actually quite sorry that I don't have all of those that I used to have back in the day, but it is what it is. Okay, power connector, for a modern power supply. This is still an ATX motherboard, so at the time when this was built, this was quite a huge thing, actually. Not necessarily a very common thing in numbers at that period in time. So SCSI connector. And we have a whole bunch of these connectors from the CPU to the motherboard. I'm not going to disassemble that. That's completely pointless. Just going to take out, some of them are probably baked in a little bit, but I'm going to do my best to take this out so that we can take some shots and put everything back in. During those days there were no cooling pastes. You just got the CPU and installed it as it is. These are the slot 1 rails. You couldn't miss that even if you tried to. Now with the LGA sockets that rule the IT world, it's quite a bit different. You can bend the pins and whatnot, which unluckily I've done multiple times. And in the past couple of years I actually repaired quite a few Intel-based servers that had problems with bent pins, which is not a task for the faint-hearted. You can break a whole lot of stuff if you don't do these things properly. And it's not only that, there might be side effects of doing such work. For example, I remember in one of the recent servers where I did that, one of the PCI Express slots doesn't work anymore because of the bent pin, which makes sense as the PCIe controller is on the CPU, so that definitely makes sense that it doesn't work anymore. Some of these are quite baked in actually, which is surprising because the screws themselves are not all that old. But you know, it is what it is. The motherboard is very old. I was lucky to get this motherboard actually from eBay. It was in pristine condition. I don't know what the guy who used to own this did with it, but it was like new, which surprised me very much. And one other thing which I liked very much as well was the fact that the back plate, metal plate, was available for the motherboard as well. That's actually what sealed the deal for me when I was thinking about buying this board. So let me just disconnect these pins now, so that we can free the motherboard. That's the metal thingy. And now I'm going to put this on the desk, and I'm going to stop for a second because I need to change the angle of one of the cameras so that we can actually see what's happening here. I'm going to just go around the desk for a brief second, and I'm going to change the angle of one of the cameras so that we can look into this. It's such a special product, especially for the era. Just goes to show you how much we moved away from doing proper design. We talked about proper motherboard designs last year, one of our most watched episodes. You know, the fact that you don't have slots on the motherboard anymore is just criminal, if you ask me. So yeah, I remember these things so well. I disassembled dozens of these computers. Now, this motherboard has, as I said, a built-in Adaptec controller. Back in those days, Adaptec was the king of the hill. There were a couple of others that were really popular, Aware and whatnot, LSI, I think already. They had some issues with termination at times, but usually BIOS upgrade or whatnot. There were a couple of versions of this motherboard as well. I remember that I bought the first one that I bought had some issues as well. I also had a sister motherboard to this one from Abit. I think it was BP6 or something like that. I used that for quite a while. I had a couple of computers at that time at home. Now it's much worse, of course, because that's the way it is when you are a computer freak, you know. Yeah, so that's the motherboard, AGP slot, PCI slots, ISA slots, old ISA slots. Yeah, this computer made a lasting impression on me, or its first revision that I used to have made a lasting impression of me. For me, in terms of learning things that I shouldn't do as well as the things that I should. The second part of that story actually is much more, let's say, technical, and it has a lot of stuff to do with the work that I do today. Probably, if I didn't have this computer, I wouldn't be into computers as much as I still am, because at times these motherboards, especially for the Pentium 1 to 3 generations, if you were assembling your computers manually, which is what I did, they were a little bit buggy in terms of BIOS settings and whatnot. They required you to read the manual, no question, because the configuration of, for example, these jumpers that we used to have determined whether or not the AGP slot is going to work, whether or not the CPU is going to work, the multiplier, the FSB frequency, whatnot. So it was much more of a technical / mental exercise, and you were forced to read the documentation, which is, as I'm sure we all know, something that people nowadays do, and which is something that us men are especially bad at, reading the documentation of any kind of appliance, not necessarily our strong suit. I actually tried using both of these slots, but none of them worked. That's why I installed another Adaptec controller. Actually, after I assembled this PC, and we're coming to that part in a second, I also bought the PCI Express version of this controller, because at times I still get calls from people to, read something from the DAT or the disk or some kind of a SCSI device, and it tends to be quite useful. But because of the fact that modern motherboards just don't have the amount of slots that the old ones do, as you can clearly see here on display. I keep it in a drawer, always ready to be used if such a situation happens. The second part of this conversation is I deliberately named the episode something like, retro PC gaming for an insane amount of money or obscene amount of money, something like that. Because the amount of money that I spent on this, and this is purely, let's say, partially it is reminiscing of the past, so it's a little bit, old school emotional experience for me. But partially it's also about the fact that I want to try to use this for a couple of other things which will become apparent in some of the future episodes. I intend to have some fun with this system, not only for gaming, although I think I'm going to do a little bit of gaming. It's summertime now, so I could spend 5 days playing Dune, no problem whatsoever. But it is absolutely insane how much money all of this costs. When you combine the cost of all of the things that you can see here as a part of my retro PC, so 200 euros for the Plex stores, roughly 150 euros for the discs, so that comes out at 350. The cables I had from bygone era, so I'm going to be kind to myself and not count that, because those would be extra 100 euros, 150 euros easily. The Terminator was extra 50, so that's 400 euros. The motherboard with the RAM and with the CPUs was close to 350 euros, so 750. The creative card was something like 80 euros, so 830, for example. This was 100 euros, 930. This was 70 euros, so that's 1,000 euros without the case and without the power supply. The case is super expensive as well, but that didn't need to be that way. I just wanted this computer to be in a, as I said, a comfortable case so that it can have enough space. And so the grand total of this is close to 1,500 euros. For that, you can buy a modern system with a lot of, like, infinitely more power, or a laptop, whichever way works better for you. So this is absolutely obscene amount of money for somebody who wants to have some fun and try to use it in a humorous way, which we will describe in some of the future episodes. Okay, so that is the disassembly process. Now I'm going to reassemble the board, but first I have to do a little bit of hackery, because some of these pins, again, it's a very old system, so sometimes these things get just baked in, so you have to use, and that's the reason why I took the scissors, these pliers, whatever you want to call them, so that I can deal with situations like this, counting on the fact that I'm going to definitely have to do it. And these screws are actually too long as well. I should actually do something about that, which I will do, but not for the purpose of this video. Right now I'm just going to get the motherboard back into a ready state so that I can put it back in the case, screw it in, connect everything back so that everything is as it was at the beginning of the video. So I didn't record this and then, play back in reverse order or something like that. I just disassembled and reassembled it in real time. That's why I'm actually talking for the whole video, so that that's easily distinguishable as well. Okay, I have one more on the lower part of the board. Some of these motherboards from that era were incredibly heavy as well. This one is no slouch, but there were quite a few that were much heavier afterwards. When I started to work as an IT journalist, I remember getting a Tian motherboard for 2 Opterons. I still have it at home. It was twice as heavy as this one, at least. And that tells you something about these sorts of, old pieces of hardware. Actually, they were designed very well. Production techniques were not as advanced as they are today. That's obviously true. So they usually didn't last as long. This one did, for whatever reason. I'm very happy about that one. but generally speaking, the components used to fail much more back then, as I'm sure most of you already know. Okay, let's put these spacers back in, and then we're going to put the motherboard back in. So let's do it in correct order so that I don't have to mess something up. Yeah, this is the version of the board without any kind of audio device, which is just one other. I don't want to call it a reason. It's actually an excuse that I used to kind of like explain to myself why I have to buy a sound blaster. I mean, I wanted to buy it either way, so it made no difference to me whatsoever if the board has a sound card or not. I was going to buy it anyway. Yeah, these boards, they have to be centered properly, otherwise you are not going to get them screwed in. That's definitely true. But before I do that, actually, I just remembered that one of my bits fell into the computer, so I have to first extract that one. I have to extract it for two reasons, so that it doesn't cause some kind of a hazard. And the second reason, because I have to use it to actually screw this in for some of these screws. So let me try to find it. This is not going to be easy. It's very heavy. Let's try again, but on the other side. Probably fell down. Okay. I'm going to make it work without it. One other thing that I didn't mention still while I was making this video is the amount of patience and time required to assemble a system like this. Obviously, quite a few components are from eBay. It took me better part of 6 months to get all of these pieces of hardware to my location. And the vast majority of reasons why it took so long isn't necessarily related to availability of the components. It was about the fact that it was related to the fact that I wanted a specific configuration, which was not necessarily easily available. And the amount of time, for example, I spent waiting for one of the cables for Sound Blaster to be connected to Plexter, which I still haven't installed, although it's been sitting on my desk for a year. Also, that was insane. I remember waiting for that for months and months to come from Spain for some reason. Actually, I started the assembly process for this computer. It was the COVID era, so you can imagine how much time has passed since I got the first component for it, which is just an insane amount of time ago. And yeah, I waited for the right time and actually the right situation to do this video, because I knew that it's going to take me better part of 2 days to make a video about this one, which actually ended up being very much on the money. I got the system here yesterday in the morning. I had to reconfigure the studio so that I can do the recording, which took most of the day yesterday. And yeah, I'm making a video today, so sometimes when you do these videos, it takes just an incredible amount of time, which I love doing. Don't treat my words as complaining, because that's not what I'm trying to say. Okay. A few more screws here and there, and we are done. I have to actually get some more of these, some of these screws that are a little bit shorter, because these are too long. I know that when I was assembling this last year, there was a reason why I use these long ones, but I cannot remember that from the top of my head now. Let's see. I need at least some sort of support here at the top as well. Okay. That one is resisting a little bit. Let me give it a hand. I'm going to take a different bit. If I have it, I think I do. Yeah, that's it. That is definitely going to help. Sometimes you have to brute force things, especially with these old components. There's just no other way. Okay, that's done. Now the second one at the top. You didn't see this, but in the center of the board there's also a place where I could screw in a screw, but I deliberately broke a spacer so that it fits inside those small pins where you can screw in these screws, so that I can orient the board and just kind of like, it's much easier to do it this way. It's something that I picked up along the way. Comes with experience of building dozens of these computers. This is something that was like a staple to me. I did that many times over, luckily for me. Yeah, I had an interesting, let's say, 5 or 6 years when I was back in college, let's call it that way, and leave it at that. I assembled so many of these systems. It's just incredible how lucky I was. Okay, we have a cooler thing here. Now we have also these front panel connectors. For these, I'm going to have to ask for a little bit more help. I'm going to use the manual. Again, some of these things you just cannot assemble without looking into the manual. P2B DS manual. Actually went through the manual a couple of months ago for another build that I did. It's available on the manual for this motherboard is available easily on the internet, so on the RetroWeb and a couple of other locations. So let's see, where is the pinout for this? I can actually see what's written on the board. I just don't want to use that because sometimes they had printing errors there, so I just want to do it properly. ATX, yeah, that's easy, that we can do later. Let's see. This is an ATX connector description, that's good. Let's see, where is the... I'm gonna have to go into the table of contents. That's much easier than just scrolling through something on a small phone. Accelerated graphic cards, RQ, DMA. Yeah, that's a topic for another day. I think it's very interesting to me, although completely uninteresting for younger generations. But you do what you gotta do. So EDLED is at the top. I know that. Let's find the pinout. There are so many of these pinouts for CPU, bus frequency, multiplier, etc. for different models and whatnot. It's just that was super interesting for us when we were younger. I know it's not like that today, but to each one their own. Okay, let's see. Fan, cable, installation, expansion cards, DMA, external connectors, that's the back panel, nothing. Okay, installation in the LED. Now we are coming to something now. Okay. Nope. A little bit more. ATX power connector. Wacom. This motherboard has Wacom LAN. I mean, there are motherboards now on the market that doesn't have Wacom LAN. It's just incredible, the amount of technology that it has here. Speaker connector, power LED, message LED, ATX power switch, DS. There we go. I found it. Okay, let's see the orientation. The orientation is... come on. Of course I messed it up now. Okay, the orientation is like this, so that I don't connect something in the wrong way. So let's see. We have power switch, we have HDD LED, and we have power LED. So the Message LED, ground, power switch, power switch. Let's first connect the power switch. That's here. That's good. HDD LED, speaker, power LED, nothing that goes to the top, obviously. That's actually going to work with the additional controller too. And now the power LEDs are at the bottom from the left hand side. So where's the plus? Plus is here. That's that. That's that. Excellent. This one gets connected to the correct place. Sometimes these cables don't have additional markings, so you have to know what you're doing. That's that. And then it's about the cards and the ATX. ATX can get connected right now. It's a little bit long, thankfully. No additional CPU connectors in that era, as you can see. That's that. So that's the sound blaster. At the top to the AGP slot, we go with All-in-Wonder. I think that that series of cards deserves a special place in the museum of the coolest hardware ever made. Here's looking at you, AMD. Okay, that's that. Let's screw them in so that everything is firmly secured in its place. That's that. That's this one. And this one. I'm gonna have to replace this, but yeah, for the time being, that's good. And LVM, this only goes one way, luckily. LVM, LVD, sorry. Got overly excited about this old technology, as people of my age usually do. What can you do? Nothing. Okay, that's that. Now, for the final part of the show, this has glass, because again, cool. Completely not in line with the idea of retro, because there were no glass cases or panels at the time when this was popular. And yes, I don't care. But actually, I waited for more than a year now to do this. I absolutely love peeling off these things off of any product, as I do now from the case side. Okay, just screw this in a little bit so that it's nice and tidy. Again, even for the new products, sometimes it just doesn't want to get in. Yeah, I love this case. It's expensive as hell, it's heavy as hell, but it's well worth it, especially for such a, let's say, close to my heart build. Okay, the computer is done. I'm just going to put it at the center of the desk now, where it was before. Oh my god, this is heavy. Just gonna put it like this. I know that it's quite difficult to see it from some of the cameras, so I'm just going to turn one of the cameras while I'm here so that we can bask in the glory of this system. There we go. Much better. So, yeah. I know it's absolutely obscene amount of money to spend on something like this. I'm not saying that I'm recommending it. I'm saying that I find that to be really cool. And Generally speaking, when I talk to people about this, they call me crazy, but I know more than a few people who disagree, so that's good. Although, even if I didn't, I would still think it's cool and do it my own way. In terms of the things that you could, let's say, install on this system and use it for. I know that currently on one of the disks I have Windows 98 2nd edition installed, which worked out of the box, no problem. You could deploy Windows XP on it as well. If you want to, XP SP3 works on this, no problem whatsoever. I've been running that in the past, so I know that that works. You just need to pay attention to download some of the drivers, especially for Sound Blaster, which sometimes can be a little bit tricky. Adaptec does work out of the box. The old all-in-one drivers are available on the net, so that's definitely doable. And you could use it, for example, for either, of course, retro PC gaming, which I mostly want to use it for, or maybe in the light of some of the things that happened in the past couple of days, months, years, whatever, hours, especially in our local environment. There's been a lot of cybersecurity breaches, and a lot of the services around the country have been brought to their knees in the past couple of weeks. I'm definitely not laughing at that. You could use this as some sort of old school, old tech, off the grid, let's say, system which you use for just something that you want to use it for, like aforementioned retro PC gaming or something else. I mean, you could install Windows XP, put some kind of old Microsoft Office on top of it, and happily use it that way as well. It will work no problem, especially as it's been upgraded with a gigabyte of RAM. And for those of you who were lucky enough to use Windows XP with that amount of memory, you know that works really well, especially on the 10K hard drives, you know, with SCSI disks and whatnot. It's just a breeze to work with. Okay, so yeah, this has been a little bit nostalgic looking down the memory lane, but for me, this building this system back in the day was very educational for debugging and troubleshooting of SCSI, learning how to use it, the correct cables, the jumpers, especially the terminators for SCSI. That's a whole other, you know, black hole of craziness that I don't want to get into today. But if you're an enthusiast, you will definitely appreciate the intricacies of this system and the craftsmanship that was involved in building, for example, this motherboard and some of the components. Practically speaking, it's a niche type of computer, retro PC gaming. You know, it is what it is. Although it's been on the rise in the past couple of years, I've noticed that heavily. There have been hundreds. Actually, let's not go too far. I've seen dozens of different retro PC gaming videos on the YouTube lately. But at the end of the day, for me, this is not just a nostalgia build. It's an exploration of a little bit of history, both my history and Yasmin's history as well. He had a very similar system to this back in the day, around the era when we met in 1995, 96, something like that. We started, you know, building our own custom PCs. I built a system like this in 99, I think, at the beginning of 1999, if I remember correctly, after I did one of the gigs that shouldn't be mentioned on camera for various laughable reasons. Okay, I think I've played around with this system for camera purposes enough. Thank you for being with me on this journey, and we'll see each other in the next episode. Bye-bye.